What would you say to a client who comes to you and says, Paris, I'm sorry, my dog ate my training program?
I would say our training program is on your app. So did they eat your phone? And if so, prioritize taking your dog to the hospital. And also, how are you messaging me?
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Truth Talks, the podcast that brings you real strategies for sustainable fitness transformation. Now, when we talk about sustainable transformation, consistency is a big part of that. And I think one of the biggest barriers to being consistent is excuses. We've all seen those fitness, mantras being like, no excuses, or heard somebody go, oh, I'm just making excuses. Or on the flip side, oh, I don't want to make an excuse, but, right? I think this concept of excuses is something we all run up against in our fitness journey. But the more I reflect on it, sometimes I think that excuses have a purpose, or maybe not a purpose necessarily, but there's a reason we're talking about them, because we all have our different perception of our own reality. And so that's what we're going to explore today. So Paris, are you making any excuses right now?
I'm pretty tough on myself. So when I do make excuses, I'll re-systematize things so that doesn't happen again. But it all depends on what standard I'm currently setting myself at. You know what I mean? If my standard is more of a balanced standard, I would say, then I'm a little bit more lenient to not make excuses, but give myself more grace. But if I set my standard for a specific goal or a specific phase, up here, I won't miss. There's nothing in the world that, other than me being in the hospital or something, that's going to stop me. So it all depends on what standard are you operating at, and I think your justifications need to reflect that.
Two things you said I really want to call out as anchors for what's to follow in our conversation now is, one is giving yourself grace, right? Because there is a difference between making an excuse and giving grace when you need it, and when there's a bigger benefit to consider, or a bigger challenge that you might need to tackle. And the other thing you said was around setting a standard for yourself. Everybody is going to have a different standard. So somebody might think, oh yeah, I'm making an excuse here, but to someone else, that's just their everyday life, right? And so at the end of the day, your fitness journey is yours. So when we think about, am I making an excuse or am I, not, or is this worthwhile excuse or is it not? It's ultimately you who's the determining factor.
Yeah. And it is kind of subjective if the excuse is valid enough. But what I will say, I this is good because you're slightly more, I don't know, you're more likely to give the grace to this conversation, I think, than I am. So this is good because I think I'm going to go more towards a no excuses type. I'm a reasonable guy, but I'll go more towards let's not make stupid excuses, and you maybe go more towards the middle. So this will be good because we can kind of give both.
Yeah, let's have a little bit of sibling rivalry today. And let's do some healthy debating on this topic.
Okay, sure.
So let's start with our debate question, okay, which is really the theme of this episode. When are you making excuses, and when are you just accepting your reality? Okay, let's first define that second part, because I feel like making excuses people get. It's a topic that they're familiar with already. They've heard enough about it. Let's talk about this idea of accepting your reality. I'm going to start with my quick definition, then I'm going to throw it to you, and you'll probably argue with me on pieces of it. Everybody has different factors that pop up during the course of their fitness journey that define the reality or the circumstances with which they're operating within. And so different people have different realities. Some people, have kids at home. Some people have others that they care for in their lives. Some people have more demanding jobs. Some people have different responsibilities in the home. Some people, I could go on and on and on, right? Everybody has a different version of their reality. And those realities do present different barriers at different points in time. If you are saying, hey, I have this really big presentation for work, there's a very senior stakeholder who is going to have visibility on it. Maybe it's going to set me up for a promotion opportunity, all that. That's a very real barrier. That could, in some ways, impact your fitness journey. Now, you have to decide in that moment, is that an excuse you're going to use and be like, oh, well, I have this presentation, I guess I'll just skip the gym. Or is that you accepting your reality? Is that you saying, you know what, this just has to be priority right now because that's my reality? And so I think that's the topic I want to get into a little bit today, is how can we better define the moments that are, I'm making an excuse or I'm finding a reason not to pursue what I know I ultimately need to do, versus this thing is just bigger than that one gym session right now.
It's tough, right, to really kind of make that delineation. But I want to preface also by saying like 99% of people are not thinking like this. Like if you are thinking about this, it's like, am I really making an excuse, or should I actually just go and do it? Like if you're thinking like that, you're probably not the type of person that's making invalid excuses, right? Because 99% of people, and I'll use something crude that actually your dad told me, he's like, excuses are like a-holes, everybody's got one, right? Which is, sorry, I had to put that in there. But the thing is, most people spend their whole lives making so many excuses for literally everything and like to blame external factors. And we're going to talk about external versus internal things in a second. Most people are not in the camp of like taking that time to reflect of like, am I really making a good excuse, or am I just like, should I be really executing on this type of thing? Most people just make way too many excuses and justifications for everything, which is also why, people stay in the same spot for long periods of time.
So since this thought process of actually saying, am I making an excuse, or is there something real happening here? That is rare, as you said, right? So how can we help people actually go through that thought process, though? If it's not something that's natural, how can we actually start to explore, okay, this is an excuse, or you know what, I do need to give myself that grace and focus on this other thing right now that is just me accepting my reality?
Interesting question. I think if your baseline level is to operate at a high level and you think that something is a true barrier, it could actually be a true barrier. But if your baseline level is not operating at a high level and you're coming up with excuses, most likely they're not truly good actual excuses that like are reasonable.
When you talk about baseline level, it makes me think about how much momentum do you have going in. So I'm going to use myself as an example. When I did my mini cut, my fat loss phase over the last, couple months, I missed a few workouts. I genuinely missed some workouts. And this is an easier one because it's quantifiable. My goal is to hit 4 workouts a week. And so if I look back at the preceding weeks and I'm like, okay, how often or what percentage of my weeks am I actually hitting my 4 workouts? It's a high percentage, right? I would say it's 90% plus. So then for me to say, okay, I have a week where I'm faced with something, I am going to miss a workout. And a couple times that was because I was traveling. A couple times it was because I made a conscious decision to prioritize work requirements. But at the end of the day, I had that high level baseline. I had momentum on my side. And I think in that case, I did give myself some grace. And I said, you know what? My reality right now is this other thing, this onboarding this client or traveling and recovering from travel by sleeping. That's more important to me. I don't want to say I earned it, but in a way I did because I had this baseline momentum already. Now, if you don't have that momentum, it's a lot easier for excuses to become a factor.
Yes.
Is that what you were alluding to?
Yes, pretty much. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. When you have momentum, introduce more flexibility. If you don't have momentum, introduce more rigidity.
That's a really good takeaway. And so I think when we don't have momentum, the excuses can flood in because we don't have those automatic behavior patterns set up yet. So the more automatic things become, I think the more likely you are to actually have that thought process of, am I making an excuse here? Or is this me accepting my version of reality?
Yep, I like it. And again, it depends on kind of like what season of life you're in. And that goes to kind of what I said about like what goal you're chasing, right? Like the level, the standard that you need to operate at, because it does come down to priorities at a certain point. Like the reason why you missed it wasn't necessarily excuses. It was more like you traded for another priority. But when you have really extreme goals, that needs to be the priority. So the excuses, you have to get it done regardless because your priorities say you did based on the goals that you're trying to chase. So I think that's an important thing to think about is like a lot of times excuses are just like priority choices almost disguised as excuses. Like when somebody says like, oh, you know what, I'm too busy to, get in shape right now. Another way of phrasing that is I care more about work and watching Netflix for 4 hours than working out. It's a priority. It's disguised as an excuse, but I am prioritizing Netflix and whatever job and going out and partying versus chasing my fitness goals. It's a priority decision.
Another common kind of excuse, let's call it, would be I'm too tired. And I think there are times where we are genuinely exhausted and adding the stress, the physiological and psychological stress of a workout can perpetuate that fatigue. That is a version of reality. However, If your excuse is, I'm too tired, but then you stay up until 1 a.m. instead of going to bed, then your priority is not rest and recovery. Your priority was doing whatever else you were doing till 1 a.m., even if that's scrolling on your phone, right? So I think what you're saying about priorities is a really, really helpful way for us to actually evaluate the validity of our excuses through the lens of, what am I choosing? If we go back to that original kind of, is it an excuse or is it accepting my reality? Then you can help yourself understand which of those it is by understanding what your priorities are, or evaluating what choice am I making? What choice am I prioritizing here?
Yeah. And I think that kind of leads us into our discussion around external versus external locus of control pretty well. People that are really successful, especially in their fitness journey specifically, operate from an internal locus of control, and we'll explain the difference. And people that tend to really not see much progress in their fitness journey tend to operate from an external locus of control. And the difference between those two is external locus of control, your perspective is, I'm in control of my decisions. I take responsibility for my actions. I can make my life drive in whatever direction I want. If results happen, it's because of the actions I'm doing or not doing. Whereas external is, whether I see X, Y, Z result or make progress is because, depending on how my work schedule is, or depending on if the kids need me, or depending on if it's rainy or sunny outside, or depending on if my boss is going to be mean to me on Wednesday or not. So it's giving power to external factors versus taking responsibility based on your internal choices to drive your life in whatever direction you want.
What are some of the excuses that people will make if they have an external locus of control? I think you touched on a few, but I want to tie them back into this idea of excuses so we can actually reflect on, when are we giving that external locus of control?
Yeah, let's touch on a few good excuses here. The biggest one is always going to be, I don't have enough time. Okay, if you go into your phone and you look at how much, and I mean, I spend all day on social media, but that's tied with our job, so it's a little bit different. But if you go into your phone and you look at the usage of how many hours you spend doing things that are not necessarily not productive, you will find that you do have time. And if I were to audit your wake up to go to bed time, you're telling me you do not have 45 minutes to do even an at-home workout circuit or something. So the excuse of, I don't have enough time is, again, choosing that I don't want to make the time. That's what you're saying.
I'm going to do that sibling rivalry thing we talked about earlier, and I'm going to challenge you on that.
Go for it.
What if somebody is not spending this excess time on social media? Like, what is an example? Who is, or what circumstance might actually say, I actually don't have time right now? Because there are people out there probably listening being like, oh, I've had days where I'm like, I don't feel like I have time. That external locus of control, when it comes to time excuse, is you giving your time elsewhere, right? Or other things dictating your time for you. AKA, everyone booked me in all these meetings today. AKA, sorry, my kids need me, which obviously they do if you have kids, but separate point. Or it's, oh, you know what? Somebody asked me to meet up with them and I just couldn't say no, right? It's giving the power into where your time goes, giving away the power to where your time goes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, an internal locus of control version of that might look like what? So somebody who chooses to take, their own time into their own hands. What are some examples of what that would look like?
Yeah, because a lot of the things on a daily basis, you can look at your week a little bit more organized and choose your pockets. And somebody who has an internal locus of control would be like, yes, I do have these other things, but I'm going to make the decision to reprioritize other things to then be able to fit this in, or I'm going to shift some other things around to make the time to do it. Like, for example, okay, maybe, I usually go for a wings night with the guys on Wednesdays. All right, this week, you know what? I'm going to say no to that so that I can sneak in that workout. And that's the prioritization principle of like, okay, it's not necessarily I didn't have the time. It's like I chose my time differently, and operating of like, I'm in control, and like, I don't have to say yes to everything just because somebody asked me is a big one. And sometimes I tell clients like, enter a season of no when I feel like there's just way too much stuff going on in their life that doesn't actually matter to them. And only they can choose what trimming the fluff is like, and what you value and what you don't value. But I think entering a season of no to things that don't serve you is good for a lot of people.
If we take that guys night wings example, if that is a priority to some people, which it very well might be for very good reasons, then it could be, oh, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
I feel my best when I work out after work, but I know I have that evening. So I'm going to choose to make time in the morning instead. So it's also not all or nothing, right? There are ways
Yes.
in which you can say no, and there are seasons of no that are important. And I think part of that is just setting boundaries. And what you say no to is your own choice. It's based on your own priorities. So it's going to look different for everybody. But also knowing that it's not necessarily like, okay, I'm saying yes or I'm saying no. It could also be a matter of like, how am I saying yes or how am I saying no? If you do say, hey, I want to say yes to both these things, then you've identified that they're both priorities, whether that's wings night and workout or whether that's meal prep and going to your kids' activities on a Sunday. You can say yes to two things at once, but it's up to you to then figure out how to make it happen.
Yep. Awesome. I like that one. Should we do that with like two more kind of
Let's
excuses?
do it. Let's talk about what is excuse number 2. So number 1 was time. Lots of times, time is the barrier. But what we've kind of talked about here is to avoid time becoming an excuse. I think auditing where your time is going, and part of that is understanding what are you saying yes to? Is there anything you might want to say no to? Also understanding how time reflects your priorities. I just want to actually, before I move into the second excuse, touch on something a friend of mine says a lot is like the biggest gift you could ever give anybody is your time. Time is like the best possible currency out there because you can never get it back. If you're talking about trying to understand what your priorities are, understanding where your time goes is probably the best way you can do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Facts,
and so
yeah.
whether that is understanding, okay, what does my schedule look like? How much time am I spending on these activities? Or even going back to the internal, external locus of control, when am I choosing how I'm spending my time versus when am I not? All that thought process gets us back to how am I really understanding if I'm making an excuse about how much time I have or I'm accepting my reality and spending my time in the way I'm wanting to.
I really like that. There's a difference between what we say is valuable to us and what we actually do. Like I could say, you know what? My fitness goals are like most important thing ever to me. But then if you look at my time, it's like I'm doing nothing that's focused on achieving my fitness goals. It's like, well, there's a difference. So as you said, in order to really, even as a person, like know where your priorities are and what you value, you can easily look at that by auditing.
And that's not just about fitness. That's the same with like everything in
everything.
life. That's the same with your relationships. Like how much time am I giving to my relationships? It's the same with your work. How much time does my work consume? Oftentimes work is a priority because it's our livelihood. But if you're like, oh man, I'm working so hard, but then, you're taking 3-hour lunch breaks, maybe it's not actually the priority you thought it was. So I think really just understanding time as your priority currency, meaning it is the currency that defines what you prioritize. Okay,
100%.
Perfect. So time, number 1 excuse we tend to see. What would be number 2?
I'm going to use this one. This is like the most aggravating one for me, I'll say. So I'll be a bit more like less soft with how I address this one, is that I'm not motivated.
That's such a deep one.
Yeah, I really, really hate that one. And it's you're operating at such a low vibrational state if that is the excuse. No offense. You're relying on a certain condition to be present in order for you to chase a goal that could extend your life or completely change the way that you feel about yourself. I'm drinking my own Kool-Aid, as I always will be on this podcast, but like you're relying on a certain condition to like really take charge of your life and your health. And motivation is kind of like the weather, right? Some days it's rainy, some days it's sunny. Motivation sometimes is up, sometimes it's down. We don't think that it's a problem when it's rainy outside. We just know that's how weather goes. Same thing with motivation. It's not a problem that you're unmotivated. You still got to do the things.
Absolutely. So even though I might be a little less rigid in my perspective, I actually agree with you on this one. Because saying I'm not motivated, therefore I'm not going to do anything, locus of control, you are then externalizing your motivation. You are making your motivation a thing that happens to you instead of something you create. So if we were to switch that, like the weather, I don't create the weather. I'm not that powerful, but it happens to me. Right? So if it's raining, it's happening to me. That is a prime example of something that is outside of my control. But when I think about my internal locus of control, I get to decide, do I put on my rain jacket or do I walk the dog and get drenched? So I'm saying, okay, what am I going to do to navigate this weather? Same thing with motivation. If motivation is something that we're expecting to happen to us instead of something we manage and create, then honestly, I would never be motivated. Even as somebody who like is so passionate about my fitness journey, like I'm often unmotivated. But what keeps me going is this thought of how do I create my own motivation? And usually that becomes a feedback loop. Because if I go out there and I do something that makes me feel energized, if I have a better workout than I was anticipating just because I got it done, I walk out of there being like, you know what? I just motivated myself for the next one. So when it comes down to this excuse of motivation and just not being motivated, I think for me, it's about understanding and accepting, first and foremost, that sometimes it just is. But then two, not relying on it to be something that comes and hits you in the face. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, great, I'm motivated. I'm going to do something about it.
Yeah, it's like we're just gonna like wait sitting there, and then one day all this motivation is gonna like come into our body, and we're like, my fitness goals. It's finally time to tackle my fitness goals after 2 decades of waiting on the couch. You know what I mean? Like it's not like this miraculous moment. It's like one day all of a sudden you're like, the motivation has arrived, and all of a sudden you're gonna completely change your life, right? Like as Courtney said, I'm the same way. I would say 60% of days I feel like I feel like going to the gym, and 40% of days I'm like, I gotta like drive all the way there, push myself like to absolute exhaustion for an hour, and then drive home. Then I got to shower, and then I got a lot of work to do. Like. But when you put in your mind as you're unconditional, this is my favorite like theme ever. Just being unconditional in your actions, meaning you don't require certain conditions to be met in order for you to do the inputs that you know you need to do, regardless of what's going on, how you feel, what the weather's like, who said what. You get done what you need to do because you're not conditional on certain things to be met in order to take action. It's like the biggest way to operate, biggest cheat code in terms of crushing your goals.
So motivation as excuse number 2, I'm just not motivated. What is the counter to that in terms of, okay, I'm not feeling motivated. I'm going to use that as an excuse to not show up. Or how do you use that to keep moving forward?
I think like if you're saying I'm not motivated, my response is, so it's not relevant.
Fair enough.
That's it. So what? It's like, oh, there's my bag's on the ground. So, right? Like, oh, there's a tree outside. So,
it's an observation. Okay. It becomes an observational fact for you. Yeah. I'm going to challenge you because that's what I'm here for.
Go for it.
How do I know? There are days where like motivation is just not there, and that's going to be a factor. You said it happens to you. I've said it happens to me. So there are moments where I am very tempted to use that as an excuse. Are there any scenarios in which you think that actually gives me permission to take a pass on whatever fitness action it is I'm trying to take? So whether that's meal prepping or whether that's getting that workout done. If I were to come to you and say, you know what, Paris, I'm not motivated today. Is there any circumstance in which instead of saying, so, you might say to me, okay, Courtney, give yourself some grace?
No, because I think you could push those responsibilities into a different time slot if like for some reason you weren't feeling motivated. I think if there was a position where like you have like a mental health crisis, that's a different story than being unmotivated. Like if you're like, hey, like today I'm really struggling, or like if it's an actual like physiological health thing, like I'm sick or like I'm really not feeling well, like those are differences. But like motivation is a little bit more, it's not that deep. You know what I mean?
You said actually what I was hoping you were going to say. Because
really?
I think that motivation becomes a blanket term that covers up the surface of something else oftentimes. When we say I'm not motivated as an excuse, there's a reason why you get so aggravated with that, because it feels meaningless to you, not just because motivation is bound to come and go, but also because it's lacking the depth that you're seeking in terms of a true reason. It's easy for us to say, I'm just not motivated, but what could be happening below that is I actually feel really unwell, or I'm struggling with my mental health today. I can't understand how to manage my stress from other things right now. Or, you know what? I'm feeling extremely burnt out. And so I think one of the takeaways or the action item here is if you find your train of thought starting to move into the direction of, oh, man, I feel so unmotivated today, understanding why, because it's oftentimes not a motivation problem, and so much as it is something else is happening that you are struggling with.
Yes.
and addressing that, just, it doesn't mean you have to fix it either. It just means you have to acknowledge it first, is often the key to understanding, is this quote unquote excuse valid for me today? Should I give myself some grace?
Yeah, I like it. I think that's very well said. I'm going to let you choose the third one.
Choose the third one?
Yeah. If you have one?
Oh.
Yeah.
On the spot. Okay, so I'm going to say one that I actually don't know how common it is if we were to look up typical fitness excuses. I don't think this one would come up there, but I think I myself have felt this, and I think some of the other people on our team might relate to this. It's the idea of someone else needing you more than you need yourself. Yeah. So the idea of, okay, I know that taking this action is going to benefit me, but you know what? This other person in my life actually needs me to direct that energy towards them instead. Whether that's a parent, a child, a friend, a partner, like a life partner, someone at work, a colleague, a boss, any of those people. I think we often make excuses for ourselves in this way that comes off as like altruistic, and there's a give and take there. And I'm not saying don't care about anybody else. I want to make that very clear. That's not what I'm saying. But I think we often spin it into a little bit of an excuse.
Yes.
What do you think?
I think that's a really good point. And what I always tell clients who, and we work with a lot of moms and a lot of power moms too, where I'm like, man, you guys impress me. I won't name names, but they know who they are. Some moms are like, I'm impressed. And I don't get impressed very often with like effort, just because I'm like, I have very high standards for
and
a
to
lot
be
of things.
fair, we have an amazing team of people who often meet your standards.
Absolutely they do. But when people like even exceed, like, wow, I'm impressed, like I'm like, wow, clap, but what I usually tell them is like, think about the person that shows up as their best self for those around them. Think about what that person looks like. Do you think if you take good care of yourself and your workouts, fuel yourself well, sleep well, that you're going to show up better for the people around you, or less good? Like, even I don't have kids, but I know I can put myself in that situation. And if I feel crappy about the way I look, I feel lazy all the time because I eat like crap and I haven't worked out in 3 months, and I sleep 5 hours a night, how good of a dad can I really be? Right? Like, and what I tell them is like, you got to keep your cup full to be able to pour. Like, if I have a liter of water here, full of a jug, think about how many people's cups I can fill up. Versus if I'm coming in with like 200 mLs of water, give a tiny bit to everybody, but not really that much. So that's kind of the analogy I use. And then like knowing that sometimes you will need to make that choice, but I think you can just do both. I really do.
It just takes a little bit of planning. And of course, we can't plan every moment in our lives, but I think, understanding what other people need from you, right? Or, you talked about being a parent. Sometimes kids' activities are pre-scheduled. Sometimes it's a matter of like communicating with, your partner and being like, hey, we're going to have this time together. Okay, we're going to set aside this time, like Friday night, date night. If you don't plan and you're like, oh, crap, the only time slot I have left in my week is Friday night. Sorry, can't do date night with you. You're not really being a good partner, right? But if you say, okay, I know Friday night is date night. How do I show up my best self? I need to get my stuff done before that so I can make space for that relationship. Then that's the example of you doing both. That's an example of you doing both. But recognizing that it's not you or them, because I think if you start to see it as, well, this person needs me more than I need to do this for myself. I hate to say this because I almost don't want to accept it because it's kind of negative, but you actually might start to resent that person because they start to interfere with your well-being. So I think really just anchoring ourselves in, how am I filling my own cup so that I can serve those around me better? If you are somebody who naturally gravitates towards any sort of nurturing instinct, you're just a social butterfly, you really like to do things for the people around you, I think it is important to be able to give to them. And even if you don't consider yourself the most nurturing important, giving to the people in our lives is critical. But understanding what are you doing for yourself first? How are you filling your cup so that you can show up your best self for them? And sometimes, going back to our point in the earlier conversation, it's not yes or no. It could be yes and, or yes however, right? So friend says, oh, let's go on a walk this afternoon. Well, you already had your workout scheduled. Instead of bailing on that, you can say, hey, what about tomorrow?
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
you're still giving to them. And most of the time, the person won't even blink. You'd be like, okay, sure, tomorrow works, right?
Yeah. If you, and again, as you said, it's towards the people, maybe their love language is acts of service, or they're a loving person, empathetic person, or like they really value relationships and want to show up. And I completely understand. And I totally respect that. I give kudos. Like, I think that's absolutely amazing. But you can do both. Like, even there was one stage in prep where like we moved Tara in the morning, then I hit legs.
When you say move, you mean
at a
like
random.
she moved apartments. You didn't just like pick her up and
Yes,
carry her around the
we
room.
moved literally. No, we literally piggyback. No, we moved her apartments in the morning. Then I went and hit legs. This was during prep, so you know how finite energy is. Then we went to go help my cousin move a couch across the city. Then we came back and helped our friend move furniture from upstairs to downstairs in their condo. I'm like, I was so exhausted that day, but like, if you, I want to show up for the people that I care about. Like, if anybody needed something that was, for example, like an emergency, I would drop everything and go. But I would also do my best to squeeze it in. Like, if there was an emergency, okay, we go, we do it, but then I'll get my workout in after, or I'll reschedule. Like, it's just finding a way to try to do both. And there's very limited scenarios where you can't have an organizational ability to restructure your week.
Emergencies
or your day.
are going to happen, right? There's going to be those moments where you do drop everything for the people around you and the people you care about. That's just not usually every day. It's an outlier.
It's an outlier. It's a complete outlier.
Yeah. So that was our third excuse, which was this idea of someone else needs me more than I need to do this for me, right? Do you have one practical tip that you want people to consider when it comes to managing how they feel about that excuse?
I think it's more just realizing, like, is there a scenario where both can happen? And if so, what would that look like? And just kind of challenging your belief system around that. And then also just really keeping in mind that analogy of like, I need to keep my cup full to better pour into everybody else's.
Okay. So we started off this episode by saying we were going to talk about excuses and how sometimes there's excuses and then there's our reality. Then we dove into 3 common excuses we hear, which is time, motivation, and someone else needs me more. I have a very serious question for you before we start to wrap up this episode. What would you say to a client who comes to you and says, Paris, I'm sorry, my dog ate my training program?
I would say our training program is on your app, on our personalized app. So like, did they eat your phone?
They eat your phone.
And if so, prioritize taking your dog to the hospital. And also, how are you messaging me?
Okay, good answer. Good answer. Great answer. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you are somebody who is sitting there and, listening and being like, I don't know, maybe I've been making some excuses, or maybe I've actually just been accepting my own reality. Either way, we hope that there was some perspective in this episode for you to help you tell the difference and be able to, have some practical tips for how you can manage those, let's call them intrusive thoughts. When I don't have time, I'm not feeling motivated, I got to do this thing for someone else first. When those thoughts pop into your head, hopefully some of the discussion topics we've tackled today help you start to move forward and acknowledge when to give yourself grace and when to maybe give yourself a little bit of a nudge.
Yeah. And I have two more things I want to touch on. I don't care if this is a bit longer. I think the right people will listen. The first one is, just as you said, we have those thoughts, intrusive thoughts, you call them, right? As you improve your, we'll call it skill set in your fitness journey, you will have a volume reduction ability on those intrusive thoughts, and you'll have a volume increasing ability on the more positive ones. Like, you can do it, you can make the time, like, you're awesome, like those types of things. But that's like a skill that develops over time. When you're first starting, you don't yet have the confidence to be able to have that volume lever to play with. But as you go, you're going to find that you have way less of those intrusive thoughts over time, and the volume of the more positive thoughts will come in.
That's because you've proved it to yourself. You've proved that you can do it when that barrier feels real or that excuse pops into your head. You've built yourself a track record, proof of concept, right? And so I think, like, if we're talking about the volume switches or the volume knobs, I almost think about it's an amplifier, right? And every action that you take and every effort that you give into your journey essentially builds the circuitry and that electric current to feed the amp so that you can play with the volume to a better degree.
I like it. And the second thing, which is not related, but I think it's important to know in terms of excuses, is And this took me some time to think about this too, even for my own journey. Because remember, like there was a point where I would make way more excuses than I should have been making, or I make justifications of why I couldn't do X, Y, Z. I lived many years when I was younger doing stuff like that. The pivot that I like to think about is there is somebody out there who is in the same scenario or even worse that has still done the actions that you're saying you can't do, which is proof that it is a limiting belief system that you have to work through. Because if they're in the same context or worse and have the same exact thing that's going on, but they still took the actions, then it proves it is possible. So the justifications aren't necessarily valid.
Fair. I think in some people's cases, they're going to say, well, I don't care about them. I just care about me, right? And I feel like this is too hard for me. Playing devil's advocate, that will always be a factor.
That's your subjective perspective.
It is. But we will never be able to fully shake our subjective perspectives. They are going to come with us wherever we go. But what you owe to yourself is to understand, okay, how might they have made it happen? And it doesn't mean you can necessarily go knock on their door and ask them, but there are a lot of resources out there, whether that's finding a role model, someone in your community. Your community probably might be more likely to be managing the same circumstances you are, or talking to a coach who has seen people in those circumstances find ways forward, and trying to figure out what are the available strategies to help you break through those self-limiting beliefs, and learning from others around you is a really, really great way. So this idea of somebody else has found a way to make it happen, use that as a learning opportunity. It's not a comparison game. Your subjective opinion still matters.
No.
However, it can be an incentive to find a strategy that feels tailored to your circumstances.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times in our fitness journey, when we do see somebody crush it that we relate to in some way, shape, or form, it smashes our belief systems. Because even if I'm looking at, maybe I saw another guy and I'm like, you know what, my job's really busy and I have a girlfriend and she lives far away and I got to drive and whatever. There's no way I can tackle this. And then you see somebody else who you can relate to, maybe it's a friend or somebody on social media or whatever. And not to say that we're comparing, but they've shown it's possible. All of a sudden you smash that belief system and be like, I can do it. And now you start taking action because your belief system has changed and now you see awesome results. And a lot of times that's even happened for some of our client community where they inspire people in their circle who can relate
and I think that's not the comparison game. Just as you said, I just want to highlight that. It's the inspiration game. Mm-hmm. It's the inspiring, being inspired from one another and being like, you know what, if they can do it, so can I. And that turns that self-limiting belief into self-efficacy, which becomes a source of empowerment. If they can do it, so can I. The takeaway and the tie-in back to the concept of excuses is, what excuses does that person have? Are they the same as your excuses? And if they're doing it, find the strategy that might have helped them so that you can help yourself. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it. This has been a pretty cool episode. I really enjoyed it.
I like to be able to share these random thoughts that I have going through my brain, because I struggle with this too. I struggle with this idea of do I feel like I'm making an excuse right now, or should I give myself grace? And the one thing that has really helped me when I have that moment, because I struggle with it on a regular basis, is having people in my corner who can also provide me with that objective feedback, being like, you know what, no, this is very real. You should prioritize this other thing. It's okay to pass on the gym today. Or being like, you know what, you'll actually feel better if you go. And I think sometimes knowing who's in your corner to really help guide you through your, let's say, excuse rationale, and someone you trust to give you an honest opinion, but also you trust them to give you grace when you need it, that can be a really helpful way forward.
That's totally true. Or even talking to yourself as an objective person, if I was coaching myself in this moment, what would I tell myself?
Yeah,
that's a great question.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. I like that one. So I know we're going a bit longer with this episode, but there is one final concept that I think ties everything together.
Okay.
That you have told me multiple times before. So I want to give you a platform to talk about it. The relationship between excuses and goals. Because we all have goals, and excuses are undoubtedly the number one barrier to achieving your goals. So what do you think your goals have to say about your excuses?
They don't care, right? At the end of the day, your goals don't care about the excuses. They just know if they've been completed or not. And that's the way to think about it. If I made a dedication of okay, I'm going to go to the gym and do these workouts 4 times per week. If my goal is completing those 4 workouts per week, the goal itself does not give 2 craps about what is happening or any excuses. It just knows if it's been completed or not. And you might have extremely valid, objectively valid reasons why it can't be done, but your goals still don't care. They
I
don't,
like to think
you
that
know?
we, me and you, are a little more compassionate than your goals might be. And there are cases in which
Yes,
we do care, right? We do care if you are navigating really challenging life circumstances. So if your goals don't
absolutely.
care, though, then I think the takeaway for us is managing our own expectations and saying, okay, if I'm expecting that I'm going to start building really great strength in the gym or changing my physique, but I am making excuses about not having time to go to the gym, I need to take accountability for that. And I need to change my expectations of the outcomes and what my goals might look like. So your goals don't care, but what you can do is actually set your expectations. And I think if you are listening to this and being like, you know what, my expectations are really high, but I'm finding myself making excuses, then you can change either side of that equation. You can choose to break through those excuses and find a way forward and stop making them excuses. Or you can find a way to change your expectations around your goals. And that's okay too. It's up to you to decide which one means more to you.
Yep. And like there's always a certain level of readiness to do the work required for a certain goal. And sometimes it's okay to say, I'm not ready for that level of commitment just yet. But I am ready for this level of commitment and adjusting that. So it goes along with adjusting your
Absolutely.
expectations.
Did we cover this topic pretty comprehensively?
I think so.
Amazing. So if you are listening to this and you are thinking about different excuses, we'd love to hear which excuses you feel are the most common when it comes to fitness journeys, because I know we only touched on 3 today and there's a ton more. Drop them in the comments below. What are the common excuses that you brush up against, either in your own head or things you hear from other people? Curious to know what they are and what they look like. And if you have tips on breaking them down, let us know too. All right, everybody, this wraps up this week's episode of Truth Talks. We talked a lot about excuses and how to manage them. And don't forget, in the process, it's also okay to give yourself some grace once in a while too. There is, at the end of the day, a difference between your excuses and your actual reality.
Awesome. Love this chat, and we'll see you guys next time. Don't forget, you want to call to action to subscribe?
If you haven't already, I'm hoping that most of you who are listening to this have already subscribed. But if you haven't, please don't forget to subscribe so that you get every new episode in your feed every Monday. A little bit of Monday motivation. Even though we know not being motivated is not a good excuse, the Monday motivation can help a little bit to pump your tires when you need it. All right, everybody. Bye for now. Have a wonderful week ahead, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.